Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today we will be building a simple API in Java Spring and that expose an endpoint and call MongoDB data to retrieve the stored data. So we'll be using Java, Spring Data and MongoDB. So let's see all this in action. So basically what we will be having here, imagine if we have a client like a browser or Postman, then we want to build an API, a Spring API. First of all, we'll be exposing the endpoint via a path, like for example, get product, and then implement a request to database to retrieve the data, for example. Then we can get the data from the MongoDB and we will display it into the browser. So basically this is what we will be building in our application. Okay, welcome back. So our first step will be to generate a Spring starter project. So for that we go to start Spring input output, and we should add some dependency. The first dependency we'll be using is the Spring web application dependency. Then we should add the Spring data Mongo. Let's look for it here. Mongo. Yes, Spring data Mongo. And we should be adding also Lombok, which will add all the annotation. And you do generate, and this will generate to a starter object. When you open it here with IntelliJ, we will have this project. Okay, so if you remember, the first step we'll be doing is to build our endpoint. For that, we'll be creating a controller package, and we call a product. Controller. Okay, so here we have our product controller. For that, we'll be adding some annotation. The first annotation we'll be adding is REST controller. The second one is request mapping. And we should specify the base one, which is the underscore. Yes, we forget the annotation at request mapping. And to do a dependency injection, we'll be adding the all argument constructor. Okay, so for that we'll be adding a get mapping here. The default will be this one as a default path. So for that, we'll be creating a function called, let's call it get products, that takes no argument. This will return a response entities of type, for now, let's call it as a string. So this function will return a string, a new, let's call it response entity of response entity. Okay, and in the body we'll be putting, in the body here we'll be putting my product. So just for testing our application, so we go here to our main object. So we need to enable Lombok here. So if we go here to our stat and go for 4040 and 8080 localhost, we get our product. Okay, so this is working. So now we should be starting to implement our products. For that, we'll come here and create a new Java class in a package called DTO, and we call it as product. For that, our product will be, let's create, for example, integer an ID. Let's get a private file, and then private, let's say for example our product will have a name, okay, and our product also could have a price, just for the sake of the example. Okay, so we have our DTOs. For that we'll be adding add data from Lombok, which will add us all the getters and setters, and we will be having also, we need to add all arguments annotation and no argument constructor. Okay, so our DTO here is ready, and then we should be going back here, and instead of returning a product like this, we can return a product here like this. We should be importing our product here from the DTOs, and then instead of the body returning this, we should be returning our products. Of course, our product here is not initialized, so let's create a new product. So let's give it an ID, let's call it 1. Let's give it a name, let's call it as an iPhone, and let's give it a price of 1,000 euros. Okay, so let's restart our application. Okay, so yes, we have to return our product here. So let's restart our application. Don't worry about these errors, but MongoDB will fix them later. Okay, so here we have our product. If we go back to our local host, and here you see we have our product, which is an ID1 and an iPhone. Okay, our next target should be adding this product and creating all the configuration for MongoDB. Okay, so for that, a few steps. The first step we need to do is to create our interface. Let's call it into DAO layer. We create a product repository. Okay, so our product repository, which will extends from Mongo repository, which is defined interface from Spring Data, and that we should specify two things. First of all, we should specify what kind of object we'll be adding to MongoDB, which is products, and we should be saying our ID, what type of ID we'll have. For our case, it's integer, but for example, you can define it as a string if you want. For example, it's not mandatory to use integers. So our repository is ready. What we need now also is in our application properties, we need to specify what kind of data. We need to specify a few application, which is the Spring Data MongoDB host, which is local host, the port, and which database are we using. For that, MongoDB, you have two ways to use it. Either you download the Compass tools to have the access to database, or you can use it with Docker. For that, I will be executing the following command, which is Docker, and we are launching a container of MongoDB on port 27017 as specified here, and we are getting the in detached mode, and we are getting the latest version. Here I have my Docker up and running. So I specified here the configuration. for it. Now, what needs to be done also, before defining into the controller the database and that add product into our database, let's add manually some values. And for that, we will be in the main function, we should implement the command runner application. And for that, it will ask you to implement the run. And for that, we will be adding some data into the database when we run our application. So for that, we'll be creating a new product. Let's call it product 1, which is new product that takes, let's say, for example, 2 as an ID. Let's get a name, call it LG, and a price, which is 1,000 euros, for example. And let's duplicate these two and call it this product 2 and product 3. Let's give it an ID of 3, an ID of 4. This is, let's call it an iPhone, and this one like Oppo. So an iPhone is a little bit more expensive. Let's get an Oppo of 900 euros. Okay, so for that, we need to inject, first of all, here, our repository that we created here. So let's inject it with auto-wired here, and we call it a product repository. Let's call it product repository. And here we'll be saving all these values into our database. Oh, for that, we using product repository save product 1. Let's duplicate this one and add product 2 and product 3. Okay, so let's restart our application. As you can see here, we have no more the error we had before. And if we go to our compacts here and try to connect to localhost, here we see our application, and here we see our 3 products that we created. So these few things that need to be noticed. First of all, in product repository save here, you can see in the repository we did not define any function to be did not define any function to add this product into the database. For that, actually, Mongo repository will offer you by default a few function here that helps you to save all, find by ID. All these functions are defined by default by MongoDB. So if you go, for example, here and try to see in product repository, all of this one, like save, delete by ID, exist, find all these functions are provided by Mongo repository by default. So you don't need to do anything. Okay, so here we added all these applications, all this product manually. Now, if we go back to our localhost and try to do like localhost here, we're still getting the default object that we created before. So let's modify this to read directly from the database. Okay, so for that, a few things we need to do. The first thing is to inject the repository, product repository that we created previously. So we already defined the all argument constructor here, so it will be injected. So when you go here and let's do, for example, a product repository and try to find all, for example, this will give us a list of all the products. So for that, we can put it, instead of reducing only one product, let's remove this one and modify the response entities that we have here to return, instead of one product, we'll be returning a list of product. So let's restart our application here. And if we go back to our browser, so here, and we do localhost 8080, we get all the 3 objects that we already created into our database. Okay, that sounds good. So here first we created the get mapping. So let's create another function, another endpoint that allow us to add a new product. Okay, so for that we'll be using the put keyword here, put mapping. Let's say, for example, response. Let's say, for example, the response entities. Sorry, here, response entity will return the product that we created. Let's call it create products. Okay, and for that we'll be needing a request body as a product, which will be transferring for with our request. So for that we'll be using the product repository and then use the safe product here. And if we look here in the safe product, and you see like the safe product will return the same object. So if we do the same, return response entity, okay, and for a body we'll be putting wherever this function will return. Okay, so let's restart our application here, and then for that we'll not be using Chrome, but instead of that we'll be using a Postman. So for that, to test the put endpoint, so we will be needing to use the Postman. So here, if we take a look to it, so if you get the 8080, we get our product. So for that, we'll be using as the put one, the put object. For the body, we'll be using, let's take one of these. Let's call it row, which is JSON. Let's add, for example, an ID 6 as an object. Let's call it SLM as a product, and it should be costing, for example, here it should cost 550, and try to send here. So here, as you see, we have 200, which is an okay status. We have our added product, and if we go back to the get and try to get all the product, if we scroll down here, we have our product already added. So here we defined a get to get all the product. Here we create a product. For the last two, let's create, for example, a delete product, a delete mapping. So response entity, let's add a void, because once the product is deleted, there is no need to return anything. So let's call the endpoint delete product. And for that, we will be requesting here parameters. Instead of request body, we'll be using path variable, let's call it a string, or better an integer, because our ID is an integer. And here we will be using this. For that, for the delete mapping, we will be specifying that we will be needing here ID. It is the same ID, and come here and use the product repository, and then call the delete product. So before deleting, because we cannot delete by ID, as we can see, for example, if you go here and see all the product here, you can delete by ID, I'm sorry. And here we will be defining, let's for example select an ID that we want to delete, and then if everything goes right, here we do the response entity. Since it's nothing, so we'll be calling here as the response entity, I'm sorry, and we'll be calling an OK on it, since we are returning a void, so we can only. Okay, so this is for the deleting. And let's say, for example, if we want to do a get here, but we want to get only by ID, we want to get one product that we need. For that, we'll be adding the same as the get mapping. We'll be doing the same. We'll be needing the ID of the product. Okay, so the response entity will be returning type of product. So get one product, and we will be needing a path variable here with the annotation. Let's call it, for example, an integer ID. And here we will be calling the product repository, and we will be find by ID. Here we'll be calling find by ID. We'll be giving the ID that we have, and here we will be calling return response entities. Okay, and then the body will be putting, let's introduce here a local variable. Okay, product, and then here into product we do the get. We need to do the get because this is an optional that is being returned by the database, not full object. So just to sum up, here we added the delete and the get mapping. So let's try to test it. First of all, we do a get to get all our product, I'm sorry. So here, imagine if we want to delete this LG with ID2. So let's pass the ID2, execute it, and we see that this is not known. Yes, because we did not restart our application. So now our application is started. Let's go back to the get, try to get all the product we see here. So let's start to delete them. Here we passed the 2, we want to delete this object, and we send it, and we see it's 200. So now if we try to get the object or the object, we see that the LG is no longer present. And now instead of having all of these values and we want to get only the Oppo product, so what we're trying to say here, we try to do is to pass this ID, the 4 ID here, and the response will get only the objects that we need. Okay, so that will be all for today. Let's try to summarize what we did until now. So first of all, we create our application, Spring application. We added the Spring data and we added the Mongo Spring Data, and we added Lombok and Spring Web to get the endpoint. We started by creating the endpoint here by using REST controller request mapping. We started with the get, and then we created a DTO here to manipulate our data, which DTO stands for Data Transfer Object. Then we implemented the repository, the Mongo repository here, to be able to use to return object as product with IDs as integer, and use all the default operation that Mongo repository provides. And after that, here we went to implement all this stuff. I mean, the get mapping to get all the products present into the database, the put mapping, which will be used to add new products, the delete mapping, and the get mapping. And please don't forget the application properties here to be able to call the database. And also, if you take a look into our application here, we added this command, which is docker run, simple docker run. Make sure that your Docker is up and running to execute this one and create a container with a database. Okay, so that will be all for today. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you in the next episode. So if you like my content, please subscribe to my channel, leave a comment if you have any question. I will try my best to answer you. So see you in the next episode.